Right, good morning. For those of you that don't know who I am Johnny Long. And my wife Alice Long is sitting out in the audience. So my story's kind of I'm going to go in kind of three bits, or at least three bits of three different scriptures. Not three different scriptures, but some scriptures to kind of describe. So I want to read to you first. I mean, it was actually the way Ronnie did his that kind of inspired me to do it this way. It made me think deeper about my story. So Deuteronomy 11, verses 18 to 21. And it says, "Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, tie them as symbols on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads." That's the important bit. "Teach them to your children, talking about them." So I'm feeling more emotional than normal this morning, don't know why. "Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." And then of course Proverbs 22 verse 6. "Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it." I don't think I had actually realized how much Jesus was around me. I did via my mum, but then when I look at the wider picture of my family circle, I was surrounded by it as a kid. Right, so that's my grandma and my grandpa on my dad's side. Grandma's name was Frances Long. I don't even know, I don't know Grandpa's name. My dad never really talked about him much. He died before I was born. My mum was pregnant with me, so Grandpa knew that I was going to be born, but he passed away. And I believe he fought in Korea, as we're talking about Remembrance Day. So that's, now, Grandma was deaf from about quite an early age. She never learned sign language. She just got on in life by reading lips. And it was difficult having conversations with her. Because her speech was quite difficult. But throughout her house, she always talked about Jesus. Probably every time I went over to visit her, there would be some mention of Jesus. Now, I don't think she went to church often, but she talked about Jesus. So I was being influenced at a very young age, never really knew it. Right, so that is my dad, John D. Wayne Long Sr. That's why I'm John D. Wayne Long Jr.
Hi, Dad.
That is my mum. She's 15.
Wow.
Whoa. And I'm in her belly. Well, not really in her belly. And my dad was 18. Now over here, you can't really see her. That is my Aunt Vivian. She becomes important later in the story.
Johnny, are they getting married?
Yes.
At 15?
Yeah.
That's allowed in them?
Yeah.
Okay.
She actually had me when she was 16, but got pregnant with me when she was 15. That's my Aunt Vivian, who was about 4 years older than my mum. She's actually pregnant in that picture with my cousin Michelle. Talk about my mum a little bit. My mum, again, she loved Jesus. And we used to, most Sundays, we would go to church. Now, I was raised Catholic, but Catholic in the States is slightly different than Catholicism here in the way that they worship and some of the practices that they do. Every Christmas, she loved the whole Christmas thing, not just the kind of decorating the tree, but the nativity scene and going and singing carols. And she always talked, and she loved watching all the nativity stuff on television. the old school like Ten Commandments stuff and those with John Wayne, that famous line, that kind of. So it was bred into me constantly. Right on the right there, that is my stepdad's. So my mum divorced my dad when I was 4 or 5. My dad had a drinking issue. He was quite a violent man. I don't remember any of that stuff. My dad later got sober, and it was just part of my journey of getting sober. So my stepdad came into my life. Dad always said that my stepdad Wendell was one of the greatest gifts that I'd ever received because of the way that my stepdad Wendell raised me. They were good friends. When my dad finally got sober, we all became, it was quite a weird, I'll explain when I get to my stepsister's wedding, it was funny. All the different bits of family that were there. So this is my stepdad's mum and dad. Now he was a Southern Baptist preacher. Okay? So I would go to this nice, quiet Catholic service with my mum and stepdad, and we'd all sit there and listen to the priest preach and stand up when you're supposed to. And then every now and then we'd go and visit them. And he'd be standing at the pulpit, screaming and yelling, spit flying from his mouth, veins popping out his neck. That's what Southern Baptist preachers did. So I was very confused about what God was, but influenced. But they absolutely loved you. We'd get around for meals and they would always pray before the meal. So it's being fed into me. Right, now I've often talked about, Ronnie, this is Granny Rabbit. And I found a picture of Granny Rabbit. Now her last name isn't Rabbit, her last name was Abbott. But we all called her Granny Rabbit. That's my little, I think that's Shane, but it's hard, it doesn't quite look like it. Anyway, she lived in what can only be called a shack in Kentucky. And we used to go visit her, and it wasn't until the early 80s that she actually got electricity and indoor plumbing. And it only happened because the kids got fed up of visiting her and not having indoor plumbing and stuff. And when you go visit, she still had the outhouse next to the house. Didn't appreciate it as a kid, but I think back on it now, and she didn't have another neighbor for 5 miles. And not quite at this age, but about 10 years earlier, she was still hunting food with a shotgun. And often snakes would come into her house and they wouldn't bother her. Proper hillbilly stuff. Yeah, proper hillbilly stuff. Love it. She loved Jesus. And she had a sign on her wall in her living room. And on the front of it, it said the answer to everything. And if you flipped it over, it said Jesus Christ. I still remember this stuff. I never had no clue as a kid how important this stuff was, but it was being fed into me. Right, so that's my stepdad Wendell, that's my mum, that's me, that's my little brother Shane, and that was my stepsister Tricia. Right, so all this time, remember, I'm going to, going to Catholic church, and we do the kind of Easter egg hunts on Sunday, that kind of thing. Right. This is my Aunt Vivian. I showed you earlier. You can't see the cards, but they're playing Uno.
Aunt Vivian.
Aunt Vivian. She's important. I'll show it wrong. So this is, I don't exactly know, but this is a baptism of some sort of me. I later went on to do like continuing Catholic development, and I got confirmed, and oddly enough we got taught how to take communion and so on and so forth, right? So this is Aunt Vivian. She was my godmother. That's her husband Bill. He was my godfather. So I'm being baptized there, and Vivian was an important part in the family because she was kind of the foundation of belief. She was probably the biggest believer in all the family, and she kept the family together, make sure we always got together for Easter and Christmas. And, she later, not long after this, she got cancer. They tried to remove the cancer. I don't know what specific kind of cancer it was, and they had to cut her leg off. I think it was just above the knee, can't remember which leg. She lived for a couple more years, and then the cancer came back, and she passed away. And it seemed when she passed away, the kind of strength of the family kind of went. And it wasn't because she had gone, it was her influence of Jesus had kind of started to fade. This is where it gets slightly complicated, right? This is my mum's father, Robert Leibold. Okay? Again, heavy drinker. He died too soon because of his drinking. Now, he and my grandmother split up. Long up, I don't even think I was born yet. He remarried this woman, Flo. But when we had family get-togethers, Flo came along. She was just another part of the family. There was no kind of, well, you can't come because you're the new wife. There was none of that. I lived with Flo near the end of her life. Well, to the end of her life. She lived in a trailer who my grandma then moved into, that same trailer, once Flo passed away. But I took care of Flo in the last probably 6 months of her life because she refused to go into any kind of nursing home. Again, huge believer in Jesus. In fact, the only thing on her television ever was TBN. Yeah, Lindsay, TBN, constant TBN, and it was just constant. Again, it's being drip fed into me, and that's all she ever talked about.
God channels.
Yeah, Trinity Broadcasting Network. She loved Pat Robertson, for those of you who know. So I took care of her until she passed away. Being drip fed Jesus, not knowing. I just put this in for fun. This is our senior prom at high school. That's my little brother Shane, because he went to the same high school. My brother has developmental disabilities, so we all got the same tuxes. That's me on the left, and that was my best friend Matt. I just put that in there for a bit of fun. Right, I don't know if you can it looks like you can see. One of my friends took this picture just to be artsy, but if you can see right through me. And you can see the lockers behind me, almost as if, not invisible, but you can see through me. And I always kept this picture, because that's how I felt. And it wasn't because I didn't have friends, I wasn't the most popular kid, but there was something missing. All this stuff I've been taught about Jesus, I didn't really have a personal relationship. So at this point in high school, I'm drinking, and I'm drinking a lot. At this point, I'm a full-blown alkie. Didn't know it. I was a full-blown alcoholic.
What age, Johnny?
I was probably about 15 or 16 here. I was lucky enough to be able to get through school with good grades because I didn't have to study a lot. And I first got drunk, full-blown drunk when I was 12. From that point on, every time I drank to blackout.
Is it a bottle you're carrying? Is that a bottle of drink?
No, I don't know what that is. It might be, I don't know. There's lots of times about high school that I don't remember. And it's that thing, I got away with a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have got away with in high school because I was on the wrestling team and because I got good grades. So the teachers would turn a blind eye. This is my cousin Misty. Now, she had a daughter as well that's about a year or two older than the two twins here. She died at the age of 22, had a brain aneurysm. Now by this time, so when I got confirmed, my mum told me, look, if you want to go to church now you can, but I'm not going to force you anymore. And as soon as she said that, off I went. Never to darken the doors of a church again, so I thought. And when you spoke to me about God, oh yeah, you want to talk to me about God? What about Aunt Vivian? What about my cousin, Misty, who died at the age of 22, leaving a husband and 3 young kids? Brain aneurysm out of the blue. Don't talk to me about your God. Show that later. So I drank and drank and drank, trying to push away the pain. And it just got worse and worse until one day, and I got up to a lot of nonsense, caused a lot of havoc. I think the one story I want to share near the end of my drinking, I was at a party. I left about 5 o'clock in the morning, drunk. I used to drink and drive quite a lot. Oh, no. I used to drive drunk a lot. So I got in the car this one night and I go speeding off to go home. And there was a car out in the middle of the road and the door was open. And as I drove, I hit the door and the door closed. And I didn't even really register that I'd done this. So I get a call the next day on my phone. And whoever had given the party, so long story made short, the lady had gone to the girl that had the party and got my phone number. And she rang and she says, I think you hit my car last night. So I don't know what you're talking about. And then it started to come back. She said, well, we can do this one of two ways. You can come over and I can look at your car, or we can call the police. Ooh. Right. So I drove over, and on the way over, I'm thinking, how can I lie my way out of this? And I'm thinking, and as I pull up, her son happened to be a kid that was well known in West Carrollton for being quite tough and mean. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to lie my way out of this, or I'm going to get hurt. So I owned up to it. Yeah, you owe me whatever money. Yeah, I'll make arrangements to have it fixed. Blah, blah, blah. And as I got in the car to get, she says, oh, by the way, the reason I was in the middle of the road is because I was delivering newspapers. And my I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl, my young son or daughter was with me, about 5. And you're lucky you didn't come a little bit earlier or a little bit later. You'd have run over her. And as I left, I felt relief. But I felt relief because I didn't end up in jail. I felt relief because I could go get another drink. The concept of having almost killed a child. Wasn't there. Drinking got worse. I ended up getting in another car accident, ended up spending some time in county jail, and part of that I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't want to be there. I was only doing it to stay out of jail, and my grand plan was, once I was off of probation, so I was on probation for a year. Once I was out of probation, I'm going to go back to drinking myself to death. That was my grand plan. I want to drink myself to death. I just thought that was my lot in life. I was just going to be one of these people who drank themselves to death. And I used to dream about my funeral. It would be like, if you've ever seen Elvis Presley's funeral, it was massive. And I used to think, that's what my funeral's going to be like. All my ex-girlfriends are going to come out and the reality was, I had nobody left in my life. I pushed everybody away. I was squatting in my own flat. It was absolute filth and squalor. And then I had the first of many spiritual experiences within Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was sat in a meeting, not wanting to be there. And who should show up other than my dad? Now, my dad at this point was 14 years sober. Completely changed his life. That violent man that my mum had left, completely different person. And he had gone back to his roots of his grandmother that believed in Jesus. He wasn't a churchgoer. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about a higher power of your own understanding, a God as we understand him. And that's who he went back to. He and his wife, who's also in recovery, showed up at a meeting that they didn't normally go to. Now, for some reason, the penny dropped. And I went, in a matter of seconds, it was like that, from wanting to die to wanting to live. And I heard this voice, and I now know it to be the voice of God. I've heard the actual voice of God quite a few times, because I panicked. I was like, yeah, I want to live now. Oh no, how am I going to live without drinking? And this voice said, well, you big dummy, because I believe God speaks to us in language that we understand at that point. That was the language I understood. You big dummy, these people were telling you how to do it. And to go from wanting to die to wanting to live in a matter of seconds, it can only be a spiritual experience. So I tried to kind of live off that for a couple of months, and things got worse, and I didn't understand. And what I had to do is I had to get a sponsor within AA, and I had to work through the 12-step program to develop. It's other people have. There's a guy called William James, and he wrote a book called Varieties of Religious Experiences. And in one of those things, he talks about what's called the educational variety, because we develop this relationship over a slow period of time. So I had that original spiritual experience, but I thought I could stay sober just on that experience alone. But in reality is I have to have that on a daily basis. Not necessarily that kind of lightning bolt, but I have to develop my relationship with God on a daily basis. So I had this kind of educational variety. Right, so at this point, I'm still not quite happy with the phrase God. The third step of Alcoholics Anonymous says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, when I did that, so I had a sponsor, and we actually did it on knees, and there's a prayer that we pray. I was fighting it at this point. So when I would think about God, Jesus would come into mind. So I would think about some of my stepdad's father's Southern Baptist preachers. I would think about the way that my mum loved Jesus. I would think about Vivian. So Jesus was always there. He was like, it's almost like he was trying to kick down the door, and I didn't want to let him in. I was quite happy with God as a broad concept, but this idea of Jesus, I was fighting it. Then a kind man within Alcoholics Anonymous, he gave me a little Bible, the Gideon Bibles, but it was a small version of it. And he said, read a proverb a day, and read. So if it was the first, you had to read all the 1, 11, 21 Psalms. I think that's how it went. Anyway, so I'm reading the Bible, right? And I think at this point, it reminds me of the story. I think at this point, I felt like the Ethiopian, which I didn't know about the time with Philip and the Ethiopian, when it says, it's in Acts 8. Verse 27, so he started out talking about Philip, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch. Now, I wasn't a eunuch, but an important official in charge of all the treasury of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship. On his way home, was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. So I was reading this stuff, but not understanding it. But God's getting in there. It's still this educational variety. And I think, Ronnie, you've often referred to these people as God-fearers. And I was a God-fearer at this point. Although I didn't have any definition to it, there's something. I knew there was something bigger and better. So I went about, I think I was about 5 years sober. I went off to Australia. I lived in Australia because I'd moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana. I met my first wife. She came back to England. She was from England. She came back to England. We then later met up in Australia. And I'm still sober, still on a daily basis trying to develop my relationship with God. Now, the funny thing was, there were a lot of street preachers in Melbourne. And the people I hung out with, they used to just take the mickey out of these people. And I found myself, and I don't know why, I found myself defending them. Saying, look, well, they're just trying to preach what they believe will save people. And I'd go away and think, why am I defending these? So God's at work. He's working hard in me. Didn't know it. So I came to England. Then I had to go off to my stepsister's wedding in Florida. I had a visitor's visa, and I was here 2 weeks, went off to Florida for now my stepsister's wedding was quite unusual. So my dad was there. My stepdad was there. Because I was looking through these pictures, and lovely pictures of my dad and my stepdad together as really good friends. My mum's boyfriend at the time was there. My grandma. So it was just this eclectic mix of people that really, if it were a film, they'd be fighting amongst each other. But we were the greatest. It was a beautiful moment, actually. And when we went out to eat and tried to explain this to the waiter, it was really funny. It was like, what? So, but when I came back, they weren't going to let me back into the country. They said, no, your visitor visa ran out when you left first. Now, this was pre-9/11, so my fiance at that point, her dad rang, told good things about me, and then they let me stay another 2 weeks, and I had to go back to Dayton, Ohio, which I never wanted to go back. And I stayed with my grandma in her trailer, the trailer that I'd lived in with Flo. And I was angry. I was so angry at God. But God, I've done everything you wanted me to do. I went off to Australia when everybody was telling me you shouldn't go to Australia, and yet I felt it in my heart that you wanted me to go there for whatever purpose, reason, whatever. And now you've brought me back to Dayton, and you've made complications. So I sat in Grandma's trailer, probably moping for about 3 weeks. Again, this voice, and I wasn't going to meetings, and this voice, Johnny, you need to get to a meeting. And I just knew in my heart, if I didn't do something, I was going to go back to the Johnny of old, and I was going to pick up a drink. So I went back, and I saw the guy that had given me the Gideon Bible. I said, Alex. In fact, his nickname, his name was Alex, but we all called him Brother Love. Just because when he walked in the room, the atmosphere changed. It could be the worst atmosphere in the world. He walked into the room and the man just exuded love. I said, do you still go to that church? Because he had taken me to a church at one point in my early recovery, but it was too much for me. And oddly, I'll share this. What I remember from that first service, and it's something that you said, Ronnie. The preacher got up and he was talking about, we're always worried about keeping up with the Joneses and wishing for what we don't have. And he said, and really, we need to be what we feel that we deserve. And really, we need to be thanking God that we don't get what we do deserve. And I remember that really hitting, because I think of my life and all the stuff I had done. And the life I have now, free gift that I absolutely don't deserve. So he took me to he said, no, I don't go to that church anymore. I go to a different church. So he took me to this church. The preacher was a guy who was a recovering addict. Everybody in the church was in recovery one way or another. Some went to AA, some didn't. The preacher had spent quite a long time in prison. So he knew about forgiveness and redemption, and he spoke a language that I could understand. And I was off to the races. He gave me a Bible. I read through the Bible in probably a couple months, and I started to understand stuff that I thought was beyond anything. And although I had people teaching me, I would read stuff and go, I get it, God, I get it. And then so I moved over my first wife and I got married. We moved over here. And I looked for a church. And this was back when they had, what was the name of that place? There was a bookstore up in Croydon.
Wesleyan.
Yes, Wesleyan. And they had a little kind of blue book that had all the local churches and stuff. So I went and I got one, because I would go into a church and I'd tell a little bit of my story, and I would tell some of the graphic bits, and then I would gauge their response. And there were a few churches, they were like, ooh, as soon as I told them that, I could see them backing away. And I thought, this isn't the church for me. And I found Harvest. And I thought, because I used to listen, so all this time that I'm in Dayton, everything I'm listening to is, I'm going to churches, I'm going to Bible studies, I'm listening to Christian radio, and my two favorites were Charles Stanley and James MacDonald. And James MacDonald, his ministry was Harvest Ministries, and I thought, I wonder if that's the same. But it wasn't. So this was back when Harvest was at Thomas More. And I remember I walked in, Ronnie came up and said hi, and I told a bit of my story, and his response was something along the lines of, it doesn't matter, or something along those lines, you're welcome here, brother. And that was it. And I found my Harvest home. So there's a few more pictures. You'll like this one, Ronnie. Right, so you got the bagpipes there. This guy, now oddly enough, this guy my dad sponsored for a long time. So this is, and Alice has been to this get together, and it's called Founders Day. And it's in Akron, Ohio every year around June 10th. And it celebrates the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is where Dr. Bob and his wife are buried in the cemetery. And there's thousands of people there. And there's a long motorcade that goes from Akron University to that gravesite. In fact, it's so long that and it's mainly Harley Davidsons. If you can imagine the sound of 2,500 Harley Davidsons roaring down the street at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's beautiful. You got people sat out on their porches all waving to us. All the police that police it of their own free time. They don't get paid for it. They volunteer to do it. It's one of the quietest times for the police in Akron. So by the time the first motorcycle gets there, the last motorcycle hasn't even left the university yet. So we get around his grave and we talk about lots of God talk and prayers, and he plays. So he's part Native American and part Scottish. That's why he's got the bagpipes, and he plays Amazing Grace on the bagpipes 3 times. Once for us, once for the partners that have had to deal with our stuff, and once for the still suffering alcoholic out there that still hasn't gotten well, or that's died of this illness. Now, let's see. Oh, that's a picture of Grandma. Grandma passed away about a year ago. Again, she believed in Jesus. So you can see this is all being drip fed into me. Now, I believe that addiction is an illness. I'm not going to sit here and debate that. You might disagree, whatever. But it leads me to a particular part of Scripture and an identification for me with Paul. And I want you to know that I wasn't a nice man when I drank. I was in so much pain. And I just wanted to stop, and I'd get drunk and I would do stuff that I was so ashamed of. But it wasn't until God came into my life that I started to change. I did the easy stuff. I go into meetings and talking to people about God, and 5 years getting to church and learning, and that was the easy bit. The hard bit was changing my heart and changing my mind, and that's the bit that God did. Now, I know there have been people that have been healed of all kinds of illnesses and diseases, and I know that there's stories of people that have been healed of their alcoholism or whatever, and then they've gone on to be able to, but that's not me. I can't drink, period. It's been over 27 years since I've picked up a drink. And when I think about this and I hear about the debate, it makes me think of Paul's vision in his thorn, and I'll read this, and it says, so it's in 2 Corinthians 12 from verse 7, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, and insults, and hardships, and persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, I am strong. And I believe my thorn in the flesh is my alcoholism. Why would God take away the one major thing that brought me to him? And I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have to rest. I have to operate within His will on a daily basis to remain that way. And it's bigger than just not drinking. It's the peace of mind I have now. It's something that I never thought I would ever have in my life. And I'm able to speak into other people's lives that have gone through the same things that I have. That's why I boast in my weakness. I can't drink. And the only way I can't do that is by God's grace on a daily basis.
Amen.
And this, so I went from squatting in my own flat, where you could lived in a basement flat, and you could smell my flat in the top, on the 3rd floor, to wanting to die. To that.
God's good. God's good.
My lovely wife, my lovely son, and me. All by the grace of God.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Amen.
Thank you, God. Sometimes you're in